Before I start, subscribe my channel and like this video. Let's go. The morning Issei Hayate almost died in his own backyard was a Tuesday. Not that the day of the week mattered much when you were a devil. Tuesdays for regular high school students meant first period math, a rushed breakfast, maybe forgetting your homework on the kitchen counter. For Issei, Tuesday meant waking up at 5 in the morning to Kiba Yudo standing in the garden with a wooden practice sword, already warmed up, already smiling that infuriating perfect smile of his, waiting. Issei groaned and pulled himself out of bed. His room was still dark. The birds outside had not even started yet. He grabbed his training shirt off the floor, sniffed it once, decided it was fine, and pulled it over his head. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. Brown eyes, messy hair, a jaw that was finally starting to look less like a kid and more like someone who had been through actual fights. Which he had. Plenty of them. He flexed once, just because he could, then headed downstairs. Rias was already in the garden too, sitting on a wooden bench with a clipboard and a cup of tea, her crimson hair catching the faint blue light of early morning. She looked up when Issei stepped outside and gave him a small nod, the kind that said she noticed he was on time and appreciated it but was not going to say so out loud. Asia was watching from the back door with a warm towel already in her hands, ready for after training. She gave him a bright smile and a small wave. He waved back and felt a little better about being awake at 5 in the morning. Kaneko was sitting cross-legged on the grass, eyes closed, meditating. Or sleeping. With Kaneko it was sometimes hard to tell. Akino stood near the center of the yard with her arms folded, already dressed in her training clothes, watching Issei with that calm half-smile she always wore. She looked like someone waiting for a performance to begin. Kiba rolled his neck once and raised the practice sword. Issei cracked his knuckles and raised his left arm. The red gauntlet of boosted gear materialized around his forearm with a familiar pulse of green light, and the emerald gem at its center glowed steadily. Drake stirred somewhere deep inside him, slow and heavy like a dragon waking from a long nap. "Good morning, partner," Drake said. His voice was deep and ancient, and always carried this undertone of someone who had seen enough of the world to find most of it mildly amusing. "Morning," Issei replied internally. "Ready? I am always ready. The question is whether you are." Issei rolled his eyes and stepped forward. The sparring session started at a measured pace. Kiba came in with controlled strikes, testing footwork, angles, reach. Issei had improved significantly over the past several months. He was not just throwing himself forward and relying on power boosts anymore. Rias had made sure of that. She had brought in Tannen for brutal aerial training, pushed Issei through weeks of endurance drills, and made him spar against every member of the peerage on rotation until he had a decent read on how different fighting styles worked. He could read Kiba reasonably well now. The knight moved with liquid precision, each step deliberate, each strike part of a longer sequence. Issei had learned that fighting Kiba meant not reacting to individual moves but trying to interrupt the whole pattern before it built momentum. He blocked a horizontal slash, stepped inside Kiba's reach, and drove his elbow toward the knight's ribs. Kiba twisted away with a small smile, and the two of them reset. "Good," Rias said from the bench, making a note on her clipboard. "Issei, your footwork on that last exchange was solid. You are still telegraphing your shoulder before a right-hand strike though." Issei made a mental note and adjusted. They went for another 20 minutes at a moderate intensity. Then Rias stood up, set her clipboard down, and said the 3 words that always made every member of the peerage straighten up slightly. "Full pressure. Go." Kiba's expression shifted. Not drastically, because Kiba was the kind of person who kept his face calm in most situations, but there was a sharpness that entered his eyes, and the way he held the practice sword changed, became more deliberate, more economical. He came in fast. Issei barely got his arm up in time. The impact rattled through his forearm and shoulder, and he stumbled half a step backward. He fired back immediately, called a small boost of power through boosted gear, and threw a straight punch that Kiba sidestepped by centimeters. They exchanged another rapid sequence, and Issei ate a hit to the ribs that made him grunt. "Boost," Drake said. Issei felt the familiar doubling of power roll through him, and he used it to push forward, forcing Kiba onto the back foot for a few seconds. But Kiba was a rating game-level knight with natural speed that most boosts could not entirely compensate for, and when Issei overextended slightly on a wide swing, Kiba ducked under it and swept his legs. Issei hit the grass hard. He lay there for a second, staring up at the lightning sky. A bird had started somewhere in the distance. Rias looked down at him from his peripheral vision. "Get up," she said, not unkindly. "You overextended. You knew you were overextending, and you did it anyway." "Why?" "Because I thought the speed difference meant he could not dodge it in time," Issei said, sitting up and pressing a hand to his ribs. And I was wrong, and," Issei paused. "And I need to trust Drake's power progression more instead of trying to force big hits before I have enough boosts stacked." Rias nodded once. Again. They went again. And again. By the 6th round, Issei was breathing hard and his shirt was completely soaked through. Asia had replaced the warm towel with a water bottle, and was watching with a worried expression that she was trying very hard to conceal. Kaneko had woken up from her meditation and was watching with something that might have been mild interest. On the 7th round, something happened that none of them expected. Kiba came in with a combination strike, fast and well sequenced, and Issei took the first hit on his guard and the second one full in the chest. The impact was harder than a practice sword had any right to be, but Kiba had excellent technique and had put genuine force into it, and Issei felt something crack in his ribs. Not break. Crack. There was a difference, and Issei had unfortunately become familiar enough with both to know which one this was. He went down hard, and this time, something in his chest went with him, not the cracked rib. Something else. Something deeper. It felt like a door opening inside him. Not violently, not with pain, but with a sensation that was almost like pressure releasing, like a room in a house he had been living in for years that he had never noticed because the door had always been sealed. And now, for a half-second, the door was open and something on the other side breathed. Issei pressed his hand flat against his sternum and felt it. A second pulse. Not his heartbeat. Not Drake's familiar draconic presence. Something else, layered beneath both, older than both, and enormous in a way that made Drake feel like a campfire next to a volcano. Then it was gone. The door closed. Issei sat on the grass with his hand pressed against his chest and said absolutely nothing for about 4 seconds. "What?" Drake said slowly, "was that?" "I was going to ask you the same thing," Issei replied internally. Drake was quiet for a moment. "That is not something I have encountered before. And I have encountered a great many things, partner." Asia was beside him before anyone else moved, her healing light already forming around her hands, her eyes wide and worried. "Issei, are you hurt? That looked really bad. I am so sorry, I should have stepped in sooner." Issei shook his head. "No, I am okay, Asia. Cracked rib, you can fix that easy." But something else happened. He looked up at Rias, who was already standing over him with a focused expression, her crimson power flickering at her fingertips as she performed a quick devil's scan of his energy output. Her eyes narrowed. "Issei," Rias said carefully, "there's a second seal inside your sacred gear." He blinked. "A second one?" "A deep one. I almost missed it. It is layered underneath Drake's core signature, which is why none of us have ever detected it before. Whatever it is, it just pulsed." She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts fascination and concern. "What did you feel?" "Like a door," Issei said. "Opening for a second. And something on the other side." Drake spoke aloud then, his voice projecting slightly so the others could hear. "I do not know what that seal is. I do not say that lightly. There is very little in this world or the next that I cannot identify on contact, but that energy signature is not in anything I can access from memory. It is old. Much older than me, and it is draconic, but it is not a heavenly dragon's power." The garden was quiet for a moment. Akino tilted her head slightly. "Older than a heavenly dragon?" Drake's gem pulsed once slowly. "Yes." Kiba had lowered the practice sword and was looking at Issei with an expression of focused concern. "Could it be harmful?" "Unknown," Drake said. But it did not feel hostile. It felt like something that had been waiting. And the impact of that strike was apparently enough to briefly disturb the seal holding it. Rias crouched down in front of Issei and met his eyes directly. She had that look she got when something serious had entered her territory, and she was choosing her next move carefully. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers lightly to the center of his chest, over his heart, and her devil power flowed in delicately, reading the layers. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she sat back on her heels. I need to call Sirzechs, she said quietly. Sirzechs Lucifer arrived that afternoon. He came through a teleportation circle in the living room of the Haida residence, which was convenient because the house was currently empty of Issei's parents who were away for a conference. He arrived alone, which meant this was not an official visit, just a brother checking in on his sister because she had called him with something that genuinely concerned her. He looked exactly like someone who should not be the most powerful devil in existence. Crimson hair, easy smile, an energy about him that was warm and casual and completely at odds with the pressure that quietly filled every room he walked into. He sat across from Issei at the kitchen table with a cup of tea Aquino had made and listened to everything Rias explained without interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Issei. May I? He asked, and gestured toward the boosted gear. Issei held out his left arm and materialized the gauntlet. Sirzechs placed 2 fingers on the emerald gem, closed his eyes, and was still for almost a full minute. When he opened his eyes, his expression was genuinely surprised. Which, Issei had come to understand, was not something that happened often with Sirzechs Lucifer. Interesting, Sirzechs said. That is not reassuring, Issei said. Sirzechs smiled. No, I suppose it is not. He sat back. What I can tell you is that the seal is not demonic in origin. It is not angelic either. It predates the current 3-faction structure by a significant margin. What is sealed inside your sacred gear, beneath Drake's power, is a contract. A contract, Rias repeated. A summoning contract, Sirzechs clarified. Someone, at some point in history, attached it to the Welsh dragon's sacred gear. Not inside Drake himself, but wrapped around the outside of his core, hidden deep enough that unless someone hit the exact right frequency of impact while the gear was active, it would never trigger. He looked at Issei with an expression of calm, focused interest. I cannot identify who or what the contract is meant to summon. The signature is completely outside my frame of reference. Drake, Issei said aloud. The gem pulsed. I have been consulting my own memories since this morning. There is one possibility I have arrived at, though I approached it reluctantly because I was not certain I believed it myself. Everyone in the room was listening. There is a being, Drake said, that exists above the dragon hierarchy. Not within it. Not beside it. Above it. She is not one of the 5 dragon kings. She is not a heavenly dragon. She predates all of those classifications. She was the first dragon, in the way that the concept of fire was the first fire. She does not have a fixed territory. She does not make alliances or political agreements. She has never, in all of recorded supernatural history, entered into a summoning contract with any being of any faction. The kitchen was very quiet. She is called Tiamat, Drake said. The goddess of all dragons. Sirzechs set down his teacup slowly. Rias had gone very still. Aquino made a small sound that might have been surprise. Issei looked around at everyone's faces and felt the weight of what Drake had just said settle onto him like a physical thing. He cleared his throat. So, I have a secret summoning contract with the goddess of all dragons hidden inside my sacred gear, and nobody knew about it. That appears to be the situation, Drake said. Okay, Issei said. That's very me, actually. Sirzechs laughed, short and genuine. He composed himself and leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. Issei, I am going to be very direct with you. If that seal continues to loosen, which it may do naturally as your power grows, the summoning contract will eventually activate on its own. It would be safer, and significantly better for everyone involved, if you could find a way to make that happen in a controlled environment rather than in the middle of a fight. How do we do that? Rias asked. Sirzechs looked at Issei. The seal responded to power impact while the gear was active. If we recreate those conditions deliberately, with proper preparation and a safe location, we may be able to open the door fully. He paused. I should mention that I have no idea what Tiamat will do if she is summoned. She has never been summoned before. I do not know if she will be angry. I do not know if she will be cooperative. I do not know if she will simply destroy everything within a 10-kilometer radius and leave. Issei processed this. Great, he said. Very reassuring. When do we do it? They chose the old Gremry training ground, 3 days later. It was a vast underground space beneath the Gremry territory, reinforced with layers of magical barriers that could theoretically contain catastrophic power output. Theoretically, Sirzechs had added 3 additional layers himself, which Rias noted was the equivalent of a master's chef double-checking your oven temperature, and then also installing a second oven just in case. The entire peerage was there. Rias had also quietly contacted Sona Citri, who arrived with Tsubaki and stood to one side with a notebook, because Sona approached everything including potential catastrophes as learning opportunities. Issei stood in the center of the space. He was wearing his training clothes. He had eaten a solid breakfast. He had said a short internal prayer to no one in particular, and mostly just said, "Please let this not be the thing that kills me, because that would be a really stupid way to go." "Drake," he said internally. "Ready when you are, partner." Issei took a breath, let it out slowly, and pushed. He drove power into the boosted gear deliberately, stacking boosts rapidly, forcing the gear to run hotter and faster than he normally would in the opening moments of a fight. The gem pulsed green, faster and faster, and he felt Drake's power rising through him like heat, filling his limbs, his chest, the back of his throat. Boost. 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 The seal responded almost immediately. That same sensation from the training session, the door, the pressure behind it, the ancient and enormous presence. But this time, instead of a crack, it was a full opening. Issei felt a tear open with a sound that was not quite physical, more like a chord struck on an instrument built from concepts rather than strings, and a golden light erupted from the center of his chest that was completely separate from boosted gear's green. The ground shook. Every barrier in the training space lit up at once and held barely. And then something stepped through. She did not step through from anywhere visible. There was no portal, no circle, no dramatic rip in reality. She simply was not there, and then she was, standing in front of Issei, close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. Tiamat was not what any of them expected. She was tall, but not impossibly so. She had the bearing of someone who had existed for longer than recorded history, and was quietly aware of this fact at all times. Her hair was a deep, rich violet that shifted toward black at the tips and had a faint iridescent quality, like a raven's wing in sunlight. Her eyes were gold, not a warm gold but a clear, almost metallic gold, vertical pupils like a reptile's, sharp and absolutely focused. Her features were angular and precise. She was wearing something that might have been clothing in a very loose interpretation of the word, layered and draped and carrying the subtle impression of scales without actually being scales. And around her, faintly visible, was the suggestion of wings. Enormous ones? Folded. The room was not large enough for her true form, Issei understood on some instinctive level, and she was extending the courtesy of making herself fit. She looked at Issei. He looked at her. "So," Tiamat said. Her voice was low and carrying and had a resonance underneath it that Issei felt in his sternum. It was the summoning contract. She sounded as though she had known this moment would come and had not been particularly worried about when. "You are the one who carries it." "Yeah," Issei said. "Hi. I am Issei Hayadu. Sorry for, whatever this must feel like from your end." Tiamat looked at him for a long moment. Her gold eyes moved from his face to the boosted gear on his arm, and something in her expression shifted. Not into warmth exactly, but into a kind of focused interest. "Welsh dragon," she said, acknowledging Drake. "Tiamat," Drake replied from within the gem. His tone was respectful in a way Issei had never heard from him before. The heavenly dragon who had fought the strongest beings in existence sounded genuinely deferential. "The contract holder is young," Tiamat observed. She looked back at Issei. "And not very impressive to look at." Issei opened his mouth. "But not entirely worthless either," she added, before he could respond. She turned slightly, taking in the room, the barriers, the assembled peerage, Sirzechs standing to the side with an expression of diplomatic calm. She was cataloguing everything efficiently, quickly. "A Gremry setup," she said. "And a Lucifer himself." She looked at Sirzechs without deference but without hostility either. "You were expecting something dangerous." "We were being appropriately cautious," Sirzechs said. "Smart," Tiamat replied, which seemed to be the closest she was going to come to a compliment. She turned back to Issei. The contract was placed in the Welsh dragon's sacred gear during the last age, she said. By someone whose name is not relevant now. The condition for activation was simple. The bearer had to be a host of genuine draconic will, not just a person wielding a dragon's power, but someone the dragon actually chose to align with. She glanced at the gem. Drake does not align with his hosts. He endures them, mostly. I take mild offense to that, Drake said. The accuracy of a statement does not require your comfort with it, Tiamat replied smoothly. She looked at issei again. Until now. Issei blinked. Until now? You chose him, she said to Drake. Another pause. Then Drake said quietly, yes. I did. Issei had not known that. He had felt that things between him and Drake were different from what he had heard about previous hosts, closer, more cooperative. But he had not known Drake had made an active choice. He felt something complicated move through his chest. Tiamat watched his face. She was very good at reading faces, clearly. That is what activated the contract, she said. The Welsh dragon choosing his hosts rather than merely coexisting with them. The seal was always waiting for that condition. And so here we are. So what does the contract mean? Rias asked from behind issei. She had stepped forward slightly, her instinct as his king moving her to be close and involved. What are you obligated to do? Tiamat looked at Rias. Not hostilely, but with the clear assessment of someone who was deciding how much weight to give what they were seeing. I am not obligated to do anything, Tiamat said. I am the goddess of all dragons. Obligations are not something I am subject to. The contract is an invitation. She looked back at issei. An invitation I accepted a very long time ago. Before the contract was even placed. Before this world took its current shape. She tilted her head slightly. I was curious what kind of being would eventually fulfill the conditions. I accepted preemptively out of curiosity. So you can leave whenever you want? Issei asked. Yes. And you chose to come? Yes. Why? He asked simply. Tiamat looked at him for what felt like a long time. Because you are interesting, she said finally. The Welsh dragon's first true partner in all the centuries he has existed. The boy who fights with his heart louder than his technique. The one who makes impossible things happen through sheer stubborn refusal to accept limits. She paused. I wanted to see it for myself. Issei did not know what to say to that. He settled on the first honest thing that came to him. Then I am glad you came, he said. And he meant it. Something shifted in Tiamat's gold eyes. Something small and almost imperceptible but real. She looked around the training space again. Where is this territory? Gremry family land, Rias said. Tiamat considered this for exactly 2 seconds. I will need somewhere to be while I observe the contract fulfillment, she said. I do not stay in one form continually and I do not require much, but I will not exist in an unsecured location. Issei looked at Rias. Rias looked at issei. A communication happened entirely without words, the kind that forms between people who have been through real things together. You can stay with us, Issei said. At my house. It is, there is a lot going on there usually. But there is room. And it is secure, Rias has made sure of that. Tiamat looked at him for a long moment. A devil's household, she said. Yeah, with a heavenly dragon's sacred gear host. Also yeah, and the Lucifer's sister, as your king. I know it sounds like a lot, Issei said, but it is actually pretty normal for us on a good day. Tiamat made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was too restrained for that. But it was something in that direction. Fine, she said. I will observe. The first week with Tiamat in the house was, to put it gently, an adjustment. She did not sleep in the conventional sense. She would find a spot, usually in the garden or on the roof, and simply be still for hours in a way that looked like sleep but probably was not. She ate occasionally, and when she did she would appear in the kitchen at unusual hours, study the contents of the refrigerator with the focused attention of someone performing a technical analysis, and then make something minimalist, and eat it standing at the counter. She did not make small talk. She answered direct questions directly. She asked questions when she wanted information, which was frequently, because she had been outside normal reality for a long time and the current state of the supernatural world held genuine points of interest for her. She was, in every measurable way, completely unlike anyone who had ever been in that house. Issei found her on the roof on the third morning, sitting cross-legged, facing east, watching the sunrise. He climbed up with 2 cups of tea, sat down a reasonable distance away from her, and held one out without saying anything. She looked at the cup. Then at him. Then she took it. They sat in silence for a while. The sun came up orange and slow over the rooftops. Does it bother you? Issei asked. Being here. In a house. In this form. Tiamat considered the question seriously. It is small, she said. But not unpleasantly so. I have been in forms of all sizes. Smallness has its own details. Issei looked out over the neighborhood. He could see the school from here, the top of the old building visible between rooftops. Can I ask you something? He said. You just did, Tiamat replied. He glanced at her. Okay. Can I ask you something else? The corner of her mouth moved. Go ahead. Why did you really come? Not the official reason. The real one. Tiamat was quiet for a moment. The tea steamed gently in her hands. Because I have watched this world from outside it for a very long time, she said. And most of what I saw was repetition. The same conflicts. The same power struggles. The same beings making the same choices for the same tired reasons. She paused. And then I saw a human boy with a dragon's soul choosing, every single time, to fight not for power or for position or for pride, but for the people standing behind him. She looked at him directly, that gold-eyed gaze that felt like being seen all the way through. I wanted to know if that was real or if I was misreading from a distance. Issei met her gaze. And, she looked back at the sunrise. The jury is still deliberating, she said. He felt a smile come onto his face despite himself. Fair enough, he said. They sat there until the sun was fully up and the neighborhood started making its morning sounds, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything else. Ophis appeared on the 5th day. She simply appeared, the way she always did, with no warning and no announcement, sitting in the living room between one moment and the next as though she had always been there, and everyone else had just failed to notice. Issei came downstairs in the morning and found her on the couch, dressed in her small Gothic Lolita outfit, looking at the wall with the focused emptiness of someone who existed in a state of perpetual removed curiosity about the world around her. He stopped in the doorway. Ophis, he said. She looked at him. Her eyes, deep violet and ancient, moved from the wall to his face with the slow deliberateness of someone who had all of the time in the world because time was not really a constraint that applied to them. There is a different presence here now, Ophis said. Draconic. Old. Yeah, Issei said. We have a guest. Ophis tilted her head. I felt it from far away. It interrupted my stillness. Issei was not entirely sure what that meant, but he nodded. Do you want breakfast? He asked, because it was what he always asked Ophis when she appeared, because the mundane offer always seemed to anchor the conversation somewhere manageable. Ophis looked at him for a moment. Then she said pancakes. He went to the kitchen. She followed him, which she did not always do, and sat at the kitchen table and watched him start making batter with the focused observation of someone studying a new phenomenon. Tiamat came in from the garden. The two of them became aware of each other at exactly the same moment, in the way that two enormous presences sometimes did when they entered the same space. Issei felt it even with his back turned, a kind of shift in the atmosphere of the room, like two different weather systems becoming aware of each other's existence. He turned around slowly. Ophis was looking at Tiamat. Tiamat was looking at Ophis. The silence lasted about 4 seconds and felt about 40 seconds longer than that. Ouroboros, Tiamat said. Dragon god, Ophis replied. Tiamat looked at Ophis with what Issei was starting to recognize as her genuine assessment expression. Then she looked at him. Then back at Ophis. Then she sat down at the kitchen table across from Ophis, folded her hands and said nothing else. Ophis looked at Issei. He is cooking pancakes, she informed Tiamat, as though this were a fact of great significance. I can see that, Tiamat said. He makes good ones, Ophis said. Issei stood at the counter with his mixing bowl and felt something that could only be described as the universe being extremely weird at him personally. He had a heavenly dragon inside his arm, the goddess of all dragons sitting at his kitchen table, and the Ouroboros dragon informing her about his pancake quality. He turned back to the stove. I will make extra, he said. The situation, as Rias noted when she arrived that afternoon, was becoming complicated. This was a significant understatement. Ophis had decided, in the quiet unannounced way she decided most things, that she was going to continue coming around. She had always done this to some degree, appearing at the Hyder residence periodically since her situation with the Cows Brigade had changed, and she had existed in a more unanchored state. But now she was coming daily, and she would sit near wherever issei was and exist in her characteristic silence, and occasionally say something that was either profound or completely random, and there was no reliable way to tell which. Tiamat observed this development with the same careful attention she applied to everything. On the 7th day, she asked issei about Ophis when they were alone in the garden after his morning training. The others had gone inside to clean up and he was sitting on the wooden bench cooling down, and Tiamat was standing a few feet away, which was her preferred way of existing in spaces when she was thinking. How long has she been coming here? Tiamat asked. A while, issei said. Since things changed for her. She does not always talk much. But she comes back. Because this place feels safe, Tiamat said. It was not a question. Yeah. I think so. Tiamat was quiet for a moment. And you let her? Without making it complicated. She is, issei said, choosing his words carefully, someone who has been very alone for a very long time in a way that I do not think she totally understands herself. The loneliness is in her, but she does not have a name for it. He paused. So yeah? I just let her come. It does not cost me anything, and maybe it costs her something if she has nowhere that just accepts her being there. Tiamat looked at him for a long moment. The gold eyes were unreadable, but the quality of the silence after what he said felt different from her usual silence. You think about people very carefully, she said. For someone who appears careless. I am a little careless sometimes, issei admitted. Yes, she said. But not about the things that matter. She looked away at the garden. There is a difference. Most people do not understand that. He looked at her profile in the morning light, the violet-black hair, the sharp features, the faint suggestion of wings at her back, and thought that whatever this was becoming, whatever shape the contract was taking, it felt less like something being imposed on him and more like something finding its natural form. He was okay with that. The first mission came at the end of the 2nd week. Rias called the peerage together in the traditional way, which for the Hyder household meant gathering in the living room after dinner when everyone was still around. She had a serious expression on and her clipboard, which meant this was not a small thing. There have been reports, she said, from the Sitri territory border and confirmed now by the Gremry surveillance network, of a factionless group operating in Ko and the surrounding areas. They are not aligned with any established organization. Their power signature is unusual, a mix of fallen angel energy and what the analysis team is calling modified sacred gear technology, things taken apart and put back together in configurations that should not work. Aquino tilted her head. Black market sacred gear tampering? Likely, Rias said. But more organized than the usual small-time operations. They have already been responsible for 3 incident sites in the city. No fatalities yet, but significant damage and evidence of power extraction attempts on low-level stray devils and supernatural beings living quietly in the area. Issei felt the familiar settling of focus that happened when a real problem entered the picture. They are hurting people who are not involved. Yes, Rias said. She looked at him. Which is why I want to handle this directly rather than passing it upward. This is our territory. She set the clipboard down. I want surveillance first, information before engagement. We split into 2-person observation teams, cover the 3 identified incident sites and the areas between them, and identify where they are operating from. Issei nodded. He also became aware that Tiamat was standing in the doorway of the living room. She had not been invited to this meeting because it was a peerage matter, but she had heard, clearly, and she was listening with the expression of someone cataloging information. He met her eyes briefly. She looked back at him steadily. He turned back to Rias. I would like to include Tiamat in this, he said. The room was quiet for a moment. Rias looked at him, then at Tiamat. She considered it for exactly as long as she needed to. You are not a member of this peerage, she said to Tiamat, directly and without apology, which was the right way to say it. No, Tiamat agreed, also directly. But you are a resident of this house and this is a matter affecting this territory, Rias said. And your capabilities are not negligible. She looked at Issei once more, then at Tiamat. You are welcome to observe the operation. Involvement beyond that is your choice to make, as Issei's contract partner. Tiamat nodded once. That is acceptable. The surveillance phase took 3 nights. Issei and Kiba covered the eastern district. Aquino and Kaneko took the southern edge. Rias coordinated from a central position while Zenobia and Asia handled the interior residential zones. Tiamat did not pair with anyone. She moved alone, which she did better than anyone Issei had ever seen, because a being of her age and ability could reduce their presence to almost nothing when they chose to. On the 3rd night she found them. She appeared beside Issei in the shadow of a building on the east end of the commercial district, so quietly that even Kiba startled slightly. A warehouse, she said. Old district. Northeast of here, approximately 400 meters. 15 individuals. Mixed human and non-human. The modified sacred gear signature is strong. They have at least 2 high-power individuals and several tactical support members. How did you locate them? Kiba asked. Tiamat looked at him. Dragon senses, she said simply. Right, Kiba said. Issei contacted Rias through the communication link they used on operations. They mobilized in 20 minutes. The warehouse fight was the first real test of how Tiamat functioned alongside the peerage, and the answer turned out to be, extremely effectively, in the way that a natural disaster functions effectively. She did not use full power. Issei understood this instinctively, and confirmed it later when she told him directly. She scaled herself to the situation, which was a fight against mid-level factionless operatives using cobbled-together sacred gear technology, and she engaged with precision rather than the overwhelming force she could have used. But even precision, applied by the goddess of all dragons, was a significant thing to witness. She moved through the warehouse like a current of water finding channels, identifying the structural threats in the opposing group and isolating them without wasted motion. When one of the high-power individuals tried to get behind Rias, Tiamat was there before anyone else could respond, and the look she gave the operative when they turned to find her in their way was enough to make them step back involuntarily. Issei, meanwhile, went at the situation with everything he had been building for months. Boosted gear active, boost stacked deliberately rather than frantically, footwork applied, Drake's guidance used rather than just his power. He took the second high-power individual in a head-on exchange that lasted nearly 3 full minutes, and left him breathing hard and bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow but standing at the end of it while the other person was not. The remaining operatives were contained by the rest of the peerage efficiently. Rias secured the location. Sona's team arrived to help with the cleanup and information extraction. Issei sat down on a crate outside the warehouse afterward, pressed his shirt sleeve against the cut on his eyebrow, and took a long breath. The night air was cool and smelled of old metal and the aftermath of discharged power. Tiamat came and stood beside him. She looked at his eyebrow. That will need attention, she said. Asia is coming, he said. She will fix it. Tiamat looked at the cut for another moment. Then she reached out and pressed 2 fingers lightly against his temple, just above the cut. A warmth moved through the contact, not healing exactly, more like something steadying, grounding. He looked up at her. She looked back down at him. You fought well, she said. Not without error. But the intent was right and the execution improved from where it began. Thank you, he said. He meant it simply, without performance. She took her fingers away and looked out at the night. He watched her profile for a moment, the way the street light caught the faint iridescence in her hair, and felt something quietly remarkable about the fact that she was here at all. That she had chosen to come. That she was standing beside him in an industrial district at 1 in the morning after a fight, having opted to be part of this instead of simply observing from an untouchable distance. He did not say any of that. He just sat there, and she stood there, and the night continued around them, and it felt like the beginning of something. Asia found him 2 minutes later and fussed over his eyebrow with her healing light and a slightly reproachful expression, and Tiamat watched this with what Issei was fairly certain was amusement, though she did not let it reach her face properly. Kaneko appeared beside Tiamat at some point during this and stood next to her in comfortable silence in the way that Kaneko did with people she had decided were acceptable. Tiamat looked down at the small white-haired girl. Kaneko looked up at the goddess of all dragons. You move quietly, Kaneko said. So do you, Tiamat replied. Kaneko nodded, apparently satisfied. Then she went to go find something to eat. Tiamat watched her go. She is interesting, the dragon goddess said. They all are, Issei said, from his seat on the crate, while Asia finished the last of the healing work. He looked around at his peerage, at Rias coordinating with Sona, at Kiba resheathing his sword, at Akino stretching her arms above her head with a satisfied expression, at Zenobia examining a scuff on her Durandal with a frown, at Asia now looking up at him with quiet worried eyes that he gave a reassuring nod to. His people. His family by choice and by circumstance and by every fight they had been through together. He felt Tiamat's gaze on the side of his face and turned to find her watching him watch them. I think I understand, she said quietly, why Drake chose you. He felt a warmth in his chest that was not Drake's power. I am still working on deserving it, Issei said honestly. Tiamat said nothing to that. But the silence felt like agreement that working towards something was its own kind of answer. The night finished, and the stars were out above Ko, and somewhere in the darkness above them a dragon goddess stood watch, and a perennial dragon host sat on a crate with a healed eyebrow, and whatever they were to each other, it had just taken one more quiet step forward. The morning after the warehouse mission, Issei slept until 9. This was unusual for him during training periods, because Rias had a strict early morning schedule and she enforced it with the quiet authority of someone who genuinely believed that discipline was an act of care. But she had come to his room at 6, looked at the way he was sleeping face down with one arm hanging off the bed and the cut above his eyebrow still faintly pink even after Asia's healing, and decided that this particular morning he had earned an extension. He woke up on his own to sunlight coming through the curtains and the smell of something being cooked downstairs and the distant sound of Zenobia arguing with someone about something, which was a sound so familiar it had become indistinguishable from ambient noise. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, doing the post-mission inventory that had become second nature. Everything hurt a moderate amount, which was actually an improvement from where he had started months ago. The cut was gone, Asia's work thorough as always. His ribs from the training session the week before were fully healed. His left arm, the one carrying boosted gear, had a deep muscle ache that came from sustained sacred gear use, but it was a familiar ache, the kind that meant growth rather than damage. He flexed his hand once. The gauntlet was not materialized, but he felt Drake there, steady and awake. Good morning, Drake said. Morning. How are you doing in there? Content, Drake said, which was not a word Issei had heard him use before in reference to himself. He paused, seeming to notice this too. That is a new word for me to use, he said. Good kind of new? Issei asked. Yes, Drake said simply. I believe so. Issei sat up and pushed his hair out of his face and thought about that for a moment. Drake, who had existed for millennia and hosted countless bearers and fought the strongest beings in every age, saying he was content. On a Tuesday morning, in Issei's bedroom, while a dragon goddess made pancakes downstairs, he was fairly sure it was Tiamat making the pancakes. He could not have explained why he was sure of this, except that the sound coming from the kitchen had a particular quality of controlled precision that he was beginning to associate with her. He grabbed a clean shirt, fixed his hair in the mirror with the usual minimal effort, and went downstairs. The kitchen was, in fact, Tiamat. She was standing at the stove with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided to understand a task and then understood it completely, no wasted motion, no uncertainty. There was a stack of pancakes on a plate near the stove, already substantial. Ophis was at the kitchen table. Zenobia was at the kitchen table across from Ophis, and the argument Issei had heard from upstairs became immediately clear. Because Zenobia had apparently decided to explain the concept of strategic retreat to Ophis, and Ophis had apparently decided this concept was flawed, and neither of them was giving ground. If you run, you are losing ground, Zenobia said, with the conviction of someone whose entire worldview had been shaped by the idea that forward momentum was a moral position. If you run, you are choosing the location of the next engagement, Ophis replied. She was not arguing with heat. She was stating things in the same flat, precise way she stated everything, but she was absolutely not conceding. Asia was sitting beside Ophis with a cup of tea and the expression of someone who had long since learned that when Zenobia got into a debate, the wisest course was to exist peacefully nearby and wait for it to resolve. Issei sat down at the table. Good morning, Asia said immediately, brightening. Morning, Issei said. He looked at the debate happening across from him. How long has this been going on? Since about 7:30, Asia said. He looked at Tiamat at the stove. She glanced at him over her shoulder. They were at this when I came down, she said. She set a plate of pancakes in front of him and returned to the stove without additional comment. He looked at the pancakes. They were perfectly made, evenly browned, exactly the right thickness. He picked up his fork. Across from him, Opha stopped mid-sentence, looked at his plate, and then looked at him. You got the first plate, she said. You were here first and you did not eat yet? He asked. I was debating, she said. He pushed the plate to the center of the table. We share, he said. Opha looked at the plate. Then she picked up a fork from somewhere, he was not entirely sure where she had produced it from, and helped herself to 2 pancakes. Zenobia also helped herself, without asking, in the way Zenobia did most things. Tiamat brought another plate and set it down, and sat at the table herself, which was something she had not done before at breakfast. She usually stood at the counter. Issei noticed this and said nothing, because he was learning that calling attention to small changes Tiamat made was not the right approach. She was testing things, deciding whether they worked for her. Pointing it out would make it a decision that had to be defended rather than something natural. So he just poured her tea and pushed it toward her side of the table. She looked at the cup. Then she picked it up. Zenobia resumed her strategic retreat debate between bites. Opha continued responding. Asia asked Issei quietly how his arm felt. Tiamat drank her tea and watched the room with those gold eyes and said nothing, but Issei caught, once, a faint trace of something on her face that might have been the beginning of feeling at home. He looked down at his breakfast and felt, despite everything that was complicated and uncertain and still developing, deeply okay. Rias called a debrief at 10. They used the club room at Co Academy, which was the traditional meeting point for peerage business that was conducted in or near the school. It was a Saturday, so the building was largely empty, which made it appropriate for conversations that should not be overheard by regular humans. Everyone filed in. Tiamat came as well, sitting slightly apart from the main group in the way she did when she was present but not trying to insert herself into the structure of things. Issei had begun to understand this as her way of respecting that there was an existing order here she had stepped into, and she was not trying to replace or override it. She was observing, and occasionally participating, and finding where she fit. Rias began. Last night's operation was successful on the primary objectives, she said. The factionless group has been neutralized at this location. Sona's team handled the extraction and interrogation, and the preliminary information suggests this was a satellite operation, not a central hub. She looked around the room. Which means there is a main operation somewhere that we have not found yet. Aquino leaned forward on the table. What were they actually trying to do? With the modified sacred gears? Sona's team is still analyzing, Rias said. But the initial read is power extraction and redistribution. They were trying to siphon energy from supernatural beings and channel it somewhere. The equipment they had was sophisticated enough that this was not amateur work. Someone built that for them. Someone with resources, Kiba said, and knowledge, Tiamat said from her position near the window. Everyone looked at her. She met the attention without changing her expression. The modification of a sacred gear is not a straightforward technical matter. Sacred gears are divine constructs. To modify them requires understanding that most beings in the current age do not have. Someone involved in this has access to very old knowledge. Is that concerning? Rias asked directly, and her directness toward Tiamat had become natural faster than Issei would have expected. Rias was good at adapting to people's communication styles. It was one of her strengths as a king. It is interesting, Tiamat said. She looked at Issei briefly. It is the kind of knowledge that tends not to survive unless it is being deliberately preserved. Someone is protecting this information and using it with intent. So we are not looking at a random group, Issei said. This is organized by someone who knows what they are doing. That is my assessment, Tiamat confirmed. Rias nodded, making a note. We continue gathering information. I will request a formal consultation with Sirzechs and cross-reference with what the Citri network knows. For now, this territory is elevated to heightened awareness. She set her clipboard down, and her tone shifted slightly, becoming less formal. How is everyone? A quiet went around the room, the kind that happened after Rio fights, when people were checking inward. Kaneko was rolling a small white stone between her fingers, which was something she did when she was processing. Zenobia had her arms folded and was looking at the middle distance with that particular expression she wore when she was thinking about something she was not sure how to say. Asia had her hands folded in her lap and was sitting straight, the picture of composed, but Issei knew her well enough to read the residual tension in her shoulders. It is always a little strange, Asia said, when something real happens. After the training and the preparation. The actual thing is always different from the exercise. That never fully goes away, Rias said, not without kindness. What you do is become better at using it rather than being used by it. Zenobia looked at Tiamat. You scaled your power down last night, she said. It was not a question. Tiamat looked at her. Yes. Why? Not complaining, Zenobia added. Just asking. Because the situation did not require more, Tiamat said. And using more than a situation requires is wasteful. She paused. Also because this is not my peerage and not my operation, and inserting overwhelming force into someone else's engagement changes what the experience is for the people who should be growing from it. There was a short silence. That is remarkably thoughtful, Aquino said. I am remarkably old, Tiamat replied. Thoughtfulness becomes easier with sufficient time and sufficient mistakes. Kiba smiled at that, the genuine one he reserved for things he actually found amusing rather than the performative one he wore for social situations. Issei looked around at his peerage, at these people he had gone into a real fight alongside last night, and felt the familiar complex warmth of belonging to something like this. Then he looked at Tiamat, who was watching the room with those gold eyes, and thought that she was finding something here too, something she had been outside of for a very long time. He did not say it, but he thought it. The afternoon was unscheduled, which was rare enough that everyone treated it slightly differently. Zenobia immediately went to find Irina, who was in the area visiting from her fallen angel-affiliated work. They had their own complicated history and their own way of processing things that mostly involved sparring and then eating large quantities of food. Kiba took his personal training time with solitary sword drills in the academy garden. Aquino disappeared in the direction of a local tea house she liked. Kaneko found a sunny spot in the club room and fell asleep. Ria stayed at her desk with paperwork and a pot of tea, which was her version of decompression. Issei found himself walking. He did not have a particular destination. He walked through the school grounds and then out through the back gate into the residential streets behind Ko Academy, the quiet ones with narrow roads and old wooden fences and gardens that people actually tended. It was a mild afternoon, enough cloud cover to keep the sun comfortable, a slight breeze. He had been walking for about 10 minutes when he became aware that he was not alone. Ophis was walking beside him. She had appeared with her characteristic non-announcement, simply materializing into pace beside him as though she had been there all along, and he had just started noticing. He glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead, hands at her sides, her gothic Lolita outfit completely incongruous with the quiet residential street but somehow not bothering anyone because of the low-level perception filter she naturally generated. "Did you follow me?" he asked. "I was going the same direction," she said. "You did not know which direction I was going." "I do now," she said. He could not argue with that. He adjusted his pace slightly so she was not half-stepping to keep up with him, though she probably did not need the adjustment. They walked in silence for a block. "You are thinking," Ophis said. Her observations about people were always strangely accurate, not emotionally nuanced, but technically correct. "Yeah," he said. "After fights I usually need to walk. Helps me process." "What do you process?" Issei thought about how to answer that. Whether I did what I should have. Whether the people I was fighting alongside are okay. Whether there is something I missed that I need to understand better. Ophis was quiet for a moment. "That is many things to carry." "Yeah. Why do you carry them?" He looked at her. "Because if I do not, then the next time something happens I am less prepared than I could have been. And I am fighting for people who trust me to be prepared." Ophis considered this in the particular way she considered things, like someone turning an object over to examine its surfaces methodically. "You think about others very often," she said. "More than yourself." "I think about myself plenty," he said. "I just think about others first." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Rias gave me a chance when I was nothing," he said. "Asia chose to stay even when it would have been safer not to." Kiba and Akino and Kaneko have fought beside me in things they could have stepped back from. He paused. When people choose you, you owe it to them to be worth it. That is the whole thing, really. Ophis was quiet for a longer time. They turned a corner and were walking alongside a small park, a neighborhood one with a wooden bench and a water fountain and a few old cherry trees that were not yet in bloom. No one has ever chosen me, Ophis said. Not in the way you mean. Issei felt the weight of that settle, and he did not rush past it or try to fix it with a quick reassurance, because he had learned that Ophis did not need reassurance as much as she needed someone to actually sit with what she said rather than redirecting immediately. That must be lonely, he said. She looked at him. Her violet eyes were expression neutral the way they usually were, but there was something in them that responded to being heard accurately. It is the only thing I have known, she said. So I do not have a comparison. But sometimes I come to this place. She gestured very slightly, meaning the Haida house, meaning the neighborhood, meaning the general vicinity of Issei and his people. And it feels different from other places. The quality of the air is different. He looked at her profile. The late afternoon light made her look younger somehow, or maybe not younger, just more real, more present than she sometimes seemed. You can keep coming, he said. That is not going to change. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Which was a simple word for what felt like a significant thing. They walked back the way they had come, and when they reached the house Ophis peeled off at the gate and vanished in the direction of wherever Ophis went when she was not here, and Issei stood at the gate for a moment before going inside. He thought about what she had said. No one has ever chosen me. He thought about Tiamat, who had been outside of everything for an age. He thought about Ophis, who existed in a kind of permanent, untouchable solitude. He thought about how sometimes the biggest, oldest, most powerful presences in a room were the ones that had been alone the longest. He went inside. That evening, Rias announced that they would resume regular training the following morning. There were collective sounds of acceptance that had different textures depending on the person. Zenovia's sound was one of straightforward enthusiasm. Kiba's was thoughtful. Kaneko's was inaudible. Asia's was gracious. Akino made a sound that suggested she was already planning something creative and potentially dangerous. Issei was sitting on the floor of the living room with his back against the couch. Drake half materialized, just the gauntlet resting on his knee, while he and Drake did the quiet internal work of calibrating. It was something they had started doing in the evenings, a kind of dialogue about how the power was sitting, what had been used, what had been strained, what needed attention. You adjusted your boost timing during the fight last night, Drake said, in the internal space they used when they were working rather than just talking. Yeah. I noticed I was stacking too fast early on and burning through the build-up before I needed it. So I held the second stack and waited for the right moment. Correct, Drake said. And it worked. The timing on the final exchange was well chosen. He paused. You are developing an instinct for the gear that goes beyond the mechanical. That is significant. Is it different from previous hosts? Drake was quiet for a moment. Yes. Previous hosts used the gear. You are working with it. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. Issei turned that over. What does it change? Long term. Everything, Drake said simply. The ceiling of what you can reach is fundamentally different when the relationship is genuine. He paused again. I did not understand that for a very long time. I thought power was power, and the host was a vessel. I was wrong. He said this without self-reproach, as a fact being stated clearly. The host matters. What they are matters. What you are matters. Issei felt something settle in his chest that was warm and solid. Thank you, he said. For choosing me. Thank you, Drake replied, for being worth choosing. Now, let us discuss your footwork. Issei smiled. They worked for another hour. Tiamat found him in the garden at around 9. He was doing the low-intensity cool-down exercises Rias had given him, slow and deliberate movements meant to bring the body down from sustained tension rather than leaving it abruptly. Tiamat came and stood at the edge of the garden the way she did, not intruding, present. He finished the sequence and straightened up. Can I ask you something? He said. She made the small gesture that meant go ahead, a slight tilt of her head. Do you have anywhere you need to be? Not in a get-out-of-my-house way, he added quickly. I genuinely mean. Is there somewhere you normally are that we are keeping you from? Tiamat considered this. No, she said. I do not have a fixed territory. I have not in a very long time. She paused. Beings of my nature tend to exist outside normal territorial structures. I am everywhere and nowhere in a technical sense, until I choose otherwise. And right now you are choosing here, he said. Yes, he nodded. Then I am glad you have somewhere to be. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking out at the garden. But he felt her gaze and did not make it a big moment because it was not meant to be a big moment. It was just the truth, said plainly, which he found was usually the best way to say things to Tiamat. She was too good at reading intention for anything else to work. There is something I want to discuss with you, she said after a moment. He turned to face her. Yeah, your training structure, she said. What Rias has you doing is appropriate for a devil's peerage in a raiding game context. It addresses your power management, your teamwork, your tactical reading, but it is not addressing the specific nature of what you are. Meaning boosted gear? Meaning the relationship between you and Drake and what that relationship is capable of producing if developed correctly, she said. The traditional training paradigm for sacred gear users treats the gear as a tool and develops the user's ability to wield it. You have moved beyond that slightly. But there is significantly further to go. He looked at her carefully. Are you offering to train me? She met his gaze. I am offering to give you a different perspective, she said. Rias's training addresses what you can do now. What I can offer is an understanding of what you are moving toward. She paused. I am the goddess of all dragons. Dragons are my subject matter. You are carrying one of the two most powerful draconic presences in existence inside a sacred gear, in a bond that has become genuine rather than mechanical. I have thoughts about what that means and where it leads. Issei was quiet for a moment. He felt Drake stir within him, attentive. Partner, Drake said privately. She is right. What she could teach you about us, about what we are and what that means, is beyond what any devil training structure could offer. It is not a replacement, it is an addition. Issei looked at Tiamat. He felt the realness of what she was offering, not just instruction, but her particular knowledge applied to his particular situation, and the fact that she was offering it at all meant something. Tiamat did not do things out of obligation. She did things because she chose to. Yeah, he said. I would like that. Thank you. She nodded once. We will begin the day after tomorrow, she said. Morning. Before Rias's training. This does not interfere with her structure, it adds to it. He almost asked if she had already thought through how to fit it into the existing schedule so it would not create any conflict with Rias's authority as his king, and then he realized that yes, she absolutely had, because that was the kind of thing she thought about. Got it, he said. She turned to go back inside. Tiamat, he said. She paused. For what it is worth, he said, I am really glad you were not angry when you got summoned. That outcome was very important to me. She looked at him over her shoulder. Her gold eyes caught the light from the house, warm and very slightly luminous. I was not angry, she said. I was curious. She paused. You do not need to be afraid of what I am, issei. He had not realized he had been holding any residual caution about that until she named it, and he felt it let go. Yeah, he said. Okay. She went inside. He stood in the garden for another moment, looking up at the sky. Clouds had come in and covered most of the stars, but there was one gap and through it he could see a handful of them, clear and very distant. Not bad, Drake said quietly. Not bad at all, Issei agreed. 2 days later, the additional training began. Tiamat chose the garden, which was large enough for what she had in mind. She had Issei materialize boosted gear but not activate any boosts. She stood in front of him and looked at the gauntlet the way a musician might look at an instrument they were evaluating. Tell me what you feel when Drake is fully present, she said. Issei thought about it. Like something big and hot and very old is layered over my own presence. Like my edges extend further than my body. Like I am more myself but also more than myself. Good, she said. That is accurate for where you currently are. Now. Feel that presence and do not use it. Just feel it. He blinked. Just feel it? Just feel it, she confirmed. No boost. No activation. Just the relationship between your presence and his. Be aware of it the way you would be aware of your own heartbeat. He took a breath and tried. It was harder than it sounded, because his instinct with boosted gear was always toward action, toward using it. Just being present with Drake's energy without channeling it into something felt like holding water in cupped hands and choosing not to drink. Good, Drake said internally. This is interesting. Is it? Issei asked. I have never had a host attempt this, Drake said. Previous hosts were always pushing, using, demanding. You are the first one who has been asked to simply be aware. Tiamat watched Issei's face. What is Drake saying? He is saying he has never been approached this way before. She nodded once, unsurprised. Because no one has ever understood the relationship well enough to approach it this way. She stepped slightly closer. The power of boosted gear is commonly described as doubling, she said. That is the surface description. The deeper truth is that it is a resonance. Your energy and Drake's energy in alignment. When that alignment is shallow, the boost is mechanical. When the alignment is deep, the boost is something else entirely. Issei looked at her. What is it when it is deep? Something no host has ever fully accessed, she said. Not because it was impossible, but because the relationship was never genuine enough. She met his eyes. You have the relationship. The question is whether you can deepen the alignment. Drake was very quiet in the internal space, the way he got when he was listening to something important. How? Issei asked. By knowing him, Tiamat said simply. Not using him. Knowing him. His history. His nature. His character. The reason he is what he is. She looked at the gauntlet. Drake is not simply a power source in your arm. He is the accumulation of everything he has ever been. The fights he has fought. The presences he has encountered. The things that changed him. She looked back at Issei. If you understand that fully, the alignment goes from mechanical to genuine. And what that produces is categorically different from a simple boost. Issei looked at the gauntlet. Then he looked at the gem, where Drake's presence lived. Can we do that? He asked, internally. It would require me to show you things I have not shown anyone, Drake said. His voice was quieter than usual. Old things. He paused. I am willing. If you are. Yeah, Issei said. I am. Then we have work to do, Tiamat said, and the first real training session began. They worked for 2 hours before Riasa's session started. Tiamat guided the process mostly through questions and observations rather than instruction. She would ask him to describe what he felt. She would direct his attention to specific aspects of Drake's presence. She would note when his awareness sharpened and when it drifted, and why. And Drake, in the internal space, began to talk, not about power levels or sacred gear mechanics. About the things Tiamat had said, the history, the nature, the fights. He told Issei about encounters from centuries past, not in the form of battle records but in the way someone tells you what a moment felt like. He told him about the first time he had encountered the White Dragon Emperor, not as an enemy in an abstract sense but as another enormous presence that was in some ways a mirror. He told him about what it felt like to exist without a host, contained in the gear between uses, and what that was like over long stretches of time. Issei listened, all of it, and as he listened, something in the alignment shifted. Incrementally. The way understanding always works, not in a single revelation but in small deepenings, each one changing the shape of what came before. When Riasa's training session began at 7 and Issei stepped into the first sparring sequence with Kiba, something was different. Kiba noticed it immediately. He checked his strike halfway through the second exchange and stepped back, tilting his head with the focused attention of someone who has just observed something they want to understand. Your presence is different, Kiba said. The gear feels different. Issei looked at his arm. The gauntlet was active but he had not boosted yet. The gem was glowing, but the light was slightly different in quality. Warmer. Less mechanical. Rias had stopped writing on her clipboard. She looked at Issei with those sharp blue eyes that missed very little and said slowly, Issei. What do